this slide shares more of those adjectives that our visitors are looking for. So it's easy to spit out some names and some dates, but when you start putting together some of these more relatable adjectives, our visitors are able to understand a little bit more about who Henry Shaw was as a person. So there are, because of his private nature, there's a lot of these characteristics like serious and private that indicate to us that, you know, he's the type of person that would rather stay at home and work independently. You know, that he is obviously very intelligent, but very curious. His book collection, the majority of the books that are on display at Tower Grove House do belong to Mr. Shaw. And so that type of curiosity, those books are about all types of topics, not just about botany or plant-based things. They're about religion and the greats and literature and all of those other types of topics. We also use the word lucky a lot, not to discredit by any means his wealth, but to acknowledge the fact that, you know, he happened to be at the right place at the right time to create a business and make the money that he did. He was also very much a visionary. He was the type of person who can do some long-term planning and see some of those goals to create what we have in front of us. He was also very concerned with his reputation and legacy based on the will that he dictated. The word controlling might have some negative connotation, but is a reasonable one because he liked to have things a particular way. And I think when you start to put things into adjectives that people relate to, oftentimes you'll hear me saying that Henry Shaw was probably the early version of a workaholic. He worked all the time. And that's partly why he never ended up with kids and married and those kinds of things that would have been popular at that time. He's also very much a product of his times. We will go further into detail in the difficult question section about Henry Shaw being a slave owner and that being a part of who he was, not offering a judgment whether that reflects his character or not, but saying matter-of-factly that he was very much a part of the world that he lived in, and that is what it is. But helping people understand, you know, he's much more than just some names and some dates and these one or two really great things. He's still a person that had behaviors and personalities that we take historic record from and turn into something that our visitors can help understand. There are a few people who worked for Mr. Shaw. There's a great exhibit in the basement of Tower Grove House that's an audio display that goes person by person through wall panels about people who worked for Mr. Shaw. So you've heard me refer to Rebecca Edom a few times. She would have been Mr. Shaw's loyal employee for over 25 years. She managed all of Henry Shaw's affairs. He was unmarried, as I mentioned, so she would have been doing everything from accounting to taking care of making sure the house help was organized and doing what they were supposed to be doing. Her room was the only one that had direct access to Henry Shaw from the opposite side of the house that would have been divided at that time. And she really would have been kind of his second hand in managing his homes and his businesses.
David, did she ever marry?
She did eventually marry. So when she came to Henry Shaw, she had been married first, and her husband had died, which was common at that time. So she was probably about 25 or so when she came to work for Mr. Shaw. And then after Henry's passing, she was an older woman, but married again. Unfortunately, Rebecca Edom's story gets much worse after she leaves Mr. Shaw. He left her quite a bit in a will, including a home, money and effects. You know, he ensured that she was taken care of, but she did choose to marry, unfortunately, the wrong person. He ended up being a bit of an alcoholic and was abusive to her. Eventually, she would take her own life due to
Oh,
the situation in which she was living in. So her story does not end as well. But she lived quite well with Mr. Shaw for many years. He treated her very much like more like a friend than an employee, and she was extremely devastated by Henry's loss. Part of her challenge also could have been some mental health issues. We have some resources that say that she would come to the board and say, Henry came to me in a dream and he says that we should do this.
Oh, my.
And so she felt very engaged with his spirit, which may or may not be the case, but so her life after Henry was not as ideal as it could have been.
So her room in Tower Grove House, it wasn't in the main house, it was in the east wing, but she
Yes.
could go through to the house?
Yes,
Do you think there was any romance there?
that's a good question. A lot of people ask that. We have no indication that that was the case. Again, Henry Shaw was probably the best person I've ever seen at like keeping those kinds of personal things personal.
So no letters found or anything like
No,
that?
no, not that we know of. We could tell clearly by her actions after his passing that she cared for him very much. She
Yeah.
worked for him for over 25 years. If that was more romantic or not, we cannot identify. But a lot of people will ask you that, and that's open to interpretation. I mean, a lot of people work for one person for a long time and have more of a friendship type of relationship, but we can't discern what their exact relationship was.
It could have even been as though he were fatherly toward her.
Right.
She was that much younger.
Right, she was quite a bit younger, exactly. So there's a lot of possibilities of which we can't say for certain. John Few is a very interesting character. He did assorted jobs for Mr. Shaw. He was a trusted employee. He would have taken Mr. Shaw's accounts to the bank, run errands for him. John Few was a free African American who had the ability to read and write. There's a great story in our exhibit in the basement about Mr. Shaw asking him if he could read and write, and when he said that he could, Henry Shaw hired him, and he did a lot of those errands and other things for Henry Shaw's business. James Gurney, a very interesting man. He would have been Henry Shaw's day-to-day operation man on garden grounds. He is the chief horticulturalist here. He would have done a lot of the planning, oversaw people planting all of those thousands of trees that we talked about earlier. James Gurney is also very interesting because he was highly trained and came from Europe. He had experience at the Royal Botanic Garden. So even at that time, Henry Shaw wanted the best of the best. And James Gurney would have helped get our garden to become more than just a prairie. We like to acknowledge all of the people who were actually doing the work. As I mentioned before, St. Louis was an immigrant city, so there was quite a bit of labor to be had. You'll see in this picture here, these are immigrants building the stone wall that you see around the edge of the building. The original wall is the side that's adjacent to the museum building that you can see from Tower Grove House. The rest of the footprint of the garden has changed a little bit throughout time, but the majority of the original wall is what's there near the museum building. But these individuals would have worked, I understand, mostly through oral tradition. I have never seen a written source of this, that immigrants, often of a single community, so we had a lot of Eastern European immigrants at that time here in St. Louis, would have lived on garden grounds and worked the 6-day-a-week labor schedule. Would have all been here because, again, this was the middle of nowhere. There was no commuting from the city to the garden, and so they would have lived on grounds and done the work of building historic buildings, building the wall, planting the trees, all of the hard labor that would have needed to have been done. We also would have had local workers coming in that there are plenty of skilled craftsmen from farm areas who would have been able to contribute to that labor and that building of the garden. That was no small feat. That what you see besides just what is planted, the infrastructure of our of our area was built in about 10 years, which is a sizable amount of work. We also will talk more about the enslaved people who would have worked here for Mr. Shaw. They would have likely been doing more tasks either in the farming realm, what was still a working farm behind Tower Grove House, and perhaps in his city home doing things like laundry or other needs. But we will talk more about that as we carry on. As we talked a little bit about beneficiaries to Henry Shaw's last will, Caroline is his sister. She would have received a fair amount of things. George Barnett, as I mentioned, received quite a bit of his liquor cabinet. Henry Shaw had a very large wine collection, and so he would have received quite a bit of that. Rebecca Edom probably would have taken the majority of his personal effects, clothes, things of that nature. James Kennedy was in as well as his ward, Joseph Monell. The Monells were a family who worked for Mr. Shaw before the Civil War, and they both of Joseph's parents died together. I'm unclear as to how that occurred, but Shaw took, what is the right word?
Guardianship?
Yes, essentially, and would have paid for Joseph to become educated, eventually to go on to college, and to become a great person.
Haley, did George Barnett ever marry?
Yes, George Barnett was married and had a family. His son, George Barnett, you hear this George Barnett referred to as George I. Barnett. And then George Barnett, the younger, also became an architect and has many buildings around St. Louis. So make sure you clarify if someone tells you it's a George Barnett building that it could be he or his son. And so his son worked in architecture into the 1900s. Unfortunately, at that time it was common for architects to keep all of the blueprints that they've designed, and so we do not have the blueprints for Tower Grove House or any other building because they were in his office that burned in the early 1900s. But yes, he did have a family, as well as Caroline. Caroline was a very interesting person as well. She was single until about 40, 45. And then she found this cute little 20-year-old guy who was in business down by the river and married him. Caroline. Yep. And so she helped Henry the majority of the time she was single, and then eventually was married to a gentleman named Julius. That's why their last name is different. But she's kind of a cool lady. She also was very instrumental in helping build Tower Grove House. When Henry Shaw would travel, she would care for his affairs. And really helped build Tower Grove House. So she had quite a bit of responsibility for a woman of her time because of her brother's trust in her. Henry Shaw also gave a lot of money to different institutions. Many of these institutions he helped create, like the Missouri Historical Society, otherwise known as the Missouri History Museum. Now, the Historical Society is a part of the museum system. The Mercantile Library, which is a cool place. If you haven't been there, they give tours. That's a really cool place. Christ Church Cathedral, again, where he was, where his final service was. He gave to many orphanages throughout his life.
Did he worship at Christ Church Cathedral?
I cannot confirm that. So I've had a lot of visitors come and ask about religious beliefs. I don't have any record, but I haven't delved deeply into their records, if they had like a guest book weekly or what have you, to identify if he was there frequently. However, many of the books in the house are religiously based. The book that sits next to his bedside is a prayer book. There's a cross on top of his mausoleum. We have many Bibles. So I have fair indication that he was of a Christian background. However, at that time, being not religious really wasn't a choice, in that everyone was religious, and that was an important part of the culture of that time period. But he did give quite a bit to them, and he worked with many orphanages that were a part of other churches as well. and so he was well known for his philanthropy throughout St. Louis. We just took that intermission because I couldn't wait, sorry. But now I would like to transition to talking about interpretation, and thinking more deeply about not just the information that we're providing them, which is what we've kind of just talked about, but how we're sharing information with the public. So interpretation here is a communication process that forges emotional and intellectual connections between the interests of the audience and the meanings inherent in the resource. So people plus Tower Grove House sounds really simple, but it can actually be really hard, because in our instance, we're taking something that is distant. I feel, this is a personal opinion, I feel that a lot of people in today's world have a hard time connecting to history because it's just a story. It sounds just like a movie or a book or something else that you hear that doesn't really have those applications in reality. So finding ways to help people understand the reality of the context of which Henry Shaw lived and how he created the beautiful space that they are in now, but also how it affects their everyday life, and that they might find they have a common interest with Henry Shaw or one of the other people we've talked about, or they can't believe that you had to go outside to go to the bathroom and what that must have been like. Those kinds of personal connections are what really make for a meaningful and memorable experience. Those are the things that make it click when they say, "What did you learn today?" So how do we make these connections? Freeman Tilden is the father of interpretation. He is essentially the first person to formalize and record thinking about interpretation, but he was employed by the National Park Service. In the 1960s, he wrote a book that started to talk about what we continue to do today. What makes for a meaningful visit? What makes for an opportunity to learn something new? So he had 6 principles that we will go through here. All of these things, and I have more resources about him and books that he's written, that the most important thing being that information, all of this information, wherever it is not interpretation. And you'll hear me say that over and over and over again, because just saying what's written down, again, we could hire robots or really cool fancy talking heads or a talking orchid. Have you ever been in the climatone? Wasn't that a talking plant? Yeah. But it's important for us to help our visitors learn through other people, because that's how you create interpersonal and emotional connections. Finding ways to relate the information that you're trying to share to the person's life. You're not going to say the same thing to a 6-year-old about a kitchen that you're going to say to an 80-year-old. Creating those revelation moments, those opportunities to say, I didn't know that, or that's really interesting, or causing someone to ask a question. And that provocation portion. My goal is always not to be the talking head that's sharing information with people, but to be the reason that they're asked another question. So I'm giving them enough that then they start to process it, and then it's, oh my gosh, well, what about this? Do you mean this? And that provocation is where learning happens. If someone's asking you a question based on what you're saying, that means that they're listening, that they're engaging with it, and that they're processing what you're trying to say. That's going to lead to retention, hopefully, or at least a greater interest and appreciation for the space that they're in. It also has to be age appropriate. So we'll go through a few key ways to kind of engage with those kiddos, because we see people from birth to 95 coming through the house, and everybody's going to have a different interest based on that life experience. So interpretation serves a purpose. the mission and purpose of Tower Grove House, we as a garden have a mission and a purpose, but at Tower Grove House, we focus it into to the garden's mission in saying that we want to discover and share knowledge about plants and their environment in order to preserve and enrich life. Now you might say, wait a minute, we're not talking about plants, but we are talking about plants in a roundabout way because we are sharing how the place that they are in right now organizes their plants, collects their plants, and what the history of creating this place about plants has done. We're working in the environment part in like an existential way. But our purpose is to share the knowledge about the life of Henry Shaw, the founder of the garden, and the history of the garden from a broad sense. So you'll hear us talk a lot about Henry Shaw because that's primarily the visual aesthetic that people are seeing when they come into the house. They're seeing his stuff, they're seeing his rooms, those types of things. But the story doesn't stop at Henry Shaw. There are lots and lots of opportunities to share more about how the garden continued after Mr. Shaw's death, the next people who lived in the house, and so on and so forth. So our goals are to forge those relationships between people and plants and the past, as well as invite those visitors to explore. So the combination of providing enough that they have some context, but then encouraging another step, either to go see another community site to learn more about Henry Shaw, the garden, any of those types of pieces. And that helps foster that appreciation for nature and history. That deepens the importance of our place and hopefully encourages people not only to return and visit multiple times, but also to give, to support us, to help us ensure that this is here for many, many more years. It's also important to remember that we're providing these experiences that incorporate open-ended inquiry and encourage that action, and by reaching all of our different audiences. Like I said, as you take this journey of volunteerism, you will come to engage with a variety of people who have a variety of needs, and finding ways to talk to all of those people about what you want to share is a challenge, but is our goal. So here's a little exercise, because I know we're tired of listening to me talk. I'm tired of listening to me talk. So think about here in just 3 minutes, just write down somewhere on like a piece of scratch paper. Think about a time where you had a memorable experience at any type of institution of learning. So that could be a museum, that could be a zoo, a state park, a historic home, anything. Just take a few minutes and think in your head about a time that was really memorable, that you thought either this is so great, this is the best vacation I've ever been on because of this, or that was terrible because X, Y, and Z. So just where you were and what made it memorable. Just a couple bullet points. Doesn't have to be a tone. It could be, if it was really
The only way I know how to.
wonderful. Okay, how we doing? We got a couple thoughts down? Okay. Does anybody want to share what they thought was memorable? Yeah, Sharon.
I think to me, last year we traveled to the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up in Mystic, Connecticut.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if anyone ever been there, but it was such, like walking back in a history book. Everything is so much older on the East Coast than what it is here in the Midwest. And we got to actually see the Mayflower tube that's fashioned just like the original Mayflower. They were cutting out large sections of rotted wood, oak, and replacing it. They're restoring the Mayflower tube. But we also got to tour a Viking ship and things like that you just don't get to do very often. So I was really in awe of the history. We walked where George Washington walked.
Yeah.
It was just awesome.
That's
The whole
awesome.
thing was awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah, anybody else? It could be good or bad, it's just memorable.
This is just a little bit, kind of the same, but it's more emotional thing for myself. In our travels, we go all over the world and the country, and we were in Zion National Park about 10 or 15 years ago, and I've always thought of myself as loving the Rocky Mountains, loving the Alps, loving where you're out in the open and you can see real far. And my sister had said, oh, Bryce is the best, Bryce is so wonderful with all the different structures or whatever, the hoodoos. And we went to Zion, and Zion is the valley, the canyon, formed by the Virgin River. And when we were there, it just hit me, I just was touched by it. And it means some type of a Hebrew word for haven, comfort, whatever. And I just felt so moved there, and we go back there a few times now whenever we can, because you're down low, and so you're kind of enclosed. And I would have never pictured myself for liking that type of a feeling.
Yeah.
But it's kind of inspired me to be open to change and seeing that there are other things that I can like,
Yeah.
not just exactly what I think I like.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Kind of like they say, you don't know what you know. It's kind of like, oh, this is a new learning experience.
That's wonderful, that's great. Dave?
Two things, one good, one bad.
Yeah.
2 years ago, we were in Belfast, Ireland, and we went into the Queen's Castle, I think the only palace that they have in Ireland.
Okay.
We had a tour guide that I vowed I would never, ever be like this. We walked around for 2 hours. She took a bottle of water with her. Every 5 minutes, she stopped to drink this water. It was the most annoying thing that I have
It
ever
was like
seen.
a loud swallow.
Oh, it was terrible, absolutely. I really loved her brogue. I mean, it was absolutely, so I just started walking away. And my wife would start yelling at me because I'm going in another room and they're in here. And, but it was, I'm not kidding, every 10 minutes she stopped and drank that water. And I don't know why, I mean, nobody else had any problem with it. That was the bad thing. The good thing, again, several years ago, we were in Xi'an, China, to see the Terracotta Warriors.
Yeah.
That is probably the highlight of all the trips we've ever taken, to see that. You hear a lot about the terracotta, the 1,000 of them they had, and that was so memorable. As I said, so and the tour guide that we had was very, very good, and that's what we as tour guides really basically, we're interpreters but tour guides, to make it interesting for the people, and that's what especially in that, to see those Terracotta Warriors. The lady we had was just absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it
That's
just so makes it so, when you make it interesting, when you're interested in it yourself, like you will be, you make it interesting for other people too, and that's when you really get a lot of questions. So, but anyway, just good and bad.
Yeah. Yeah, does anybody else want to share? You don't have to.
I had
Yeah.
an experience recently that really knocked my socks off, and I'm thinking that it parallels what we were talking about a little bit, because last Friday I went to Art and Bloom at the St. Louis Art Museum in Forest Park, and the unique interpretation of the paintings or sculptures, which some are more current, but most go back in history, by floral designers. So it's kind of a parallel there. And the beauty of the art and the beauty of the floral design, it was like, and the beauty of the magnificent exhibition halls, it was just incredibly beautiful to be there.
Yeah.
And then the other aspect of it was going with another friend who's a floral designer, so that, you know, we really got into critiquing it and voting on our choices and all that sort of thing, but also talking with docents who were there and some of the designers who were there talking about their work. That was also I was on the more of the receiving end of interpretation in that. It was very interesting to hear designers say how they made decisions and certain plant material and so on. And it was curious, other ones who weren't there with the docent or designer to explain, you wondered, why did they put that gigantic hairy heliconium on that thing, you know? So,
Yeah.
but it was all very interesting. And we also had a beautiful day for it, and since there's such a lot of light, especially in the new wing, it was a really wonderful museum experience.
Great, that's great.
My most memorable experience is watching the transformation of this garden.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I've been all over the world and nothing compares to this. But I was a teacher right here adjacent to this garden.
Yeah.
And we used to walk our classes up and watch the Japanese garden being put in. We watched from the entrance being by the Sphinx Pavilion to this unbelievable building. And this used to be a ball field where they used to play touch football on and things like that. That to me is the most memorable experience of my life, is watching this place transform.
Now you're reminding me that in high school I played field hockey in Tower Grove Park and never knew anything about
This garden.
how it was given to us by Henry Shaw and all of them.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you know, I like to talk about the memorable experiences because at the end of the day, our goal is to create some really great memories for people. Whether that's because they've learned something new, or they came here and they saw something they've never seen before, or at the very least, we were just really great people to hang out with for 15 minutes. But finding what makes those experiences memorable, we're gonna talk through here because there are a few things that I hear you saying that has to do with the fact that someone was trained to assist in your appreciation of that space. There was a person beyond just what you were seeing or might have been in awe in that would make you say, if I'm ever there again, I'm gonna go do that again, which is what we're looking to share. Interpretation is organized. That seems like a simple thing, but if you have to know that as the volunteer, you're reading the people and what they need, but you're also kind of in charge. You're the person that has the information in their mind that you want to share with them. You have all of the really cool things that are going to make this space really great. And so, as I mentioned before, it's really important when a visitor walks into our space to greet them and say, hello, how are you? Have some conversation. I know I hear Dave a lot of times asking people where they're from. If they say, I'm not from St. Louis, oftentimes you're talking about where they're from and connecting with them just as people. And then indicating to them, you know, I have something I could share with you here for the next few minutes. And then it's a self-guided tour. So giving them the way to say no if they're not ready to listen to you talk, but knowing that you're not going to trap them for 2 hours drinking water or just rambling. Having them understand, you know, you're not there to trap them, to force them to listen to you, but you're genuinely there to share something that might enhance their experience. It requires some specific goals, and that's a lot of what we've been talking about here. I go into any time I'm interacting with a visitor trying to remember that my goal is not for them to remember what I'm saying, but it's for them to be thinking about what I'm saying. Whether it's they heard one little piece of something I said, and then they're thinking in their head, that girl sounds crazy, I don't think that's true, or wait a minute, does she mean this? generating that provocation, those questions in their mind, is really what's going to create those experiences where you have a conversation with someone and they're sharing something with you in a way that's digestible, that's understandable, and giving you the opportunity to think through what they're trying to share. We are not, often, it's hard. We work in the education department, but we are teachers, but not in the traditional sense. This is the only time, I keep saying, it's hard for me to listen to my voice for this long, because I'm not accustomed to standing anywhere and talking for an extended period of time, even when I'm at the house. My goal is to give a little bit to create some interest, and then they're asking me questions and we're having a conversation. I'm not lecturing at them, I'm not reading them a script. We're having a conversation that's creating opportunities to retain information instead of just a lecture. Oftentimes that requires some key points or an outline. You can take all this information, again, all you're seeing today is a whole bunch of information. You can take that and turn it into whatever you need to create those key points. To have an intention, okay, if the intention is that you want every person who comes into Tower Grove House to know one more thing about who Henry Shaw is, then what are your key points to make that a reality? That type of organization is what's going to allow you to feel confident being in control of the situation. And that sounds very aggressive, but you, as the person who are comfortable in the space, are the person that has to lead what they're doing. So many of our visitors, I joke a lot, we are the cherry on top of this beautiful Sunday, because most people who are coming to the garden aren't coming to see the house. We're just an accidental thing that they're saying, oh, I didn't know you had that, I guess I'll go in there. And they walk inside and they look around and they say, I've never been in a historic house before, I don't know what to do here. They need you. They need someone to say warmly, hello, how are you doing? Open that comfort level and then tell them, hey, I can share some more about Mr. Shaw with you if you'd like, and then you'll get to explore on your own. Yes, Boyd?
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
About your questions that you get. Are they more about the house? Are they more about Henry Shaw and his life?
I would say it's a fair amount of both. Because people are coming to us with a variety of backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
There are some days I feel like I am only talking about architecture for 8 hours. It's crazy. There's just trends. And then there are times where you get asked the same 5 questions about when Henry Shaw was born or this or that. And so I would say it's varied. That's what's so challenging about this situation is that you have to be prepared for anything. And sometimes that's usually impossible. And so that's why I had mentioned before, saying I don't know is okay. Because there's no way for you to be prepared to answer every question that someone's going to ask you, either about Henry Shaw, or the architecture of the building, or the Victorian district, or the history of the garden. It's okay to say no. I don't know. Let me check into that. And let me see if the staff knows. Let me see, the next time you come, I'm going to know the answer to that. That's a really interesting question. You know, that there's truly no way to be completely prepared for what people are going to throw at you, because every single time I work, there's a question I've never heard before. There are days, the last time I worked, somebody asked me, what is the square footage of this first floor? And I don't know. That's an interesting question. You know, you never know what someone is going to ask you. But being able to either share a place where they can find that information themselves or trying to help them find the answer at least shows that you're willing to try to help in having that conversation with them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you why I asked that question. I worked over the holidays in the display with poinsettias.
Yes.
I had 14 pages of information. I'm trying to be prepared. All this information was about the flowers. The first question I got asked was about the trains.
Yes.
I didn't have a clue.
Yes. Yes. And that will come, and that's okay. It's a hard thing. All of us as interpreters take our job as the keepers of the knowledge, that job very seriously, and it's just not realistic that everyone could know everything. I could give you every resource I have, every book I've ever read, and I still get questions that I say, that's really interesting. I've never thought about that. And that has to be okay. If you say it in a way that is genuine and also maybe provides them with a resource. I've gotten better at knowing my resources. A lot of times people will say, well, I thought that this was over here in the garden back in the 1850s. I say, that's interesting. If you go to our illustrated history online, there's a lot of maps on there. I'm not certain, but there might be a map on there that can help you discern that. So giving them the resources, oftentimes, God help me, I'll preface this by saying I am from New Mexico. I know nothing about plants at all. And even coming into the house, people will say, what is that tree that's out front?
There's a sign up there that says.
Yeah. So redirecting them to either check it out and look at the signage, or saying, if you go to our website for Kemper, our home gardening website, that is all of the maps of every area of the garden. Here are some resources for you to either find it yourself and then say, I'm going to go check on that now, and show that genuine interest that usually appeases most people. Yes, Dave.
Just a real quick question I was asked one time. These three ladies came in. Obviously, they had been celebrating before. You know, it was during and she comes up to me and she says, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure. That's what we're here for." She said, "Did Rebecca ever visit Henry's bedchamber?" And I said, "I don't know."
It wasn't there.
And she says, "Oh, come on." She says, "You could tell me." She said, "Did she ever?" Her bedroom just right across the hallway. I said, "I don't know." And I said, particularly, "I don't care either, you know." And she says, "Well, thank you for being so discreet," and turned around and walked away. But I mean, so you get not about train, but about things like that too. So that, you know.
And Boyd, I was going to add, and again, not to pick on Dave, but I was going to say someone like Dave Dave works at the visitor engagement station. He's a docent. He works at the house. You can ask someone that works in various areas or who has one specific role. You can ask any staff that's been here. I've been here, it'll be 4 years this year. I get asked something all the time. No matter how prepared you think you are, you're gonna get asked something. You know, there's been a lot of new people. When we were training for the orchid show this year, I've had a lot of volunteers that are newer in the show that are working this year. And whenever I see them, I try to ask them, you know, how did it go? How's everything? And I don't want to say every one of them, but more than not have said, well, I got this question. And I read the whole thing. I made all these flashcards. I know all about the orchids. And I got asked about this court, you know, display. I got asked about the actual display, or I got asked about this bug I saw in the show, or I got asked, you know. And again, that's something that we as staff, you'll hear Haley and I and others say this a lot. We really ask that you be flexible and patient and just kind of, I don't want to say roll with it, but roll with it, because you get, and again, Dave, I'm not picking on you, but can't you attest that as long as you've been here, you get questions all the time,
Oh my
that
gosh.
regardless of how prepared you are.
And 95% of them are fun questions too. I mean, as I said, you know, every once in a while you'll get something that's a little bit deep, but 98% of them are a lot of fun. I mean, you get, you know, like the trains, I don't know about a train. I mean, whatever, you know, Rebecca visiting Henry, I don't know, and I don't really care. I mean, you know, a lady asked me one time, what was the house before it was a house? And I said, a house? And she said, fine, thank you, turned around and walked away. I mean, you get 95% are fun questions too, you know.
And that is a great segue to our next slide, which is that interpretation is enjoyable. This is a fun activity. It should be fun for you. It should be fun for the visitors. If you're just having a conversation with someone, I think that oftentimes I characterize interpretation as like the perfect example of the Midwest, and that I'm just opening the front door and saying hello and having a chat with people. You meet people from all over the world. You meet people with all different types of backgrounds who are interested in all types of things. And my purpose there is just to make the space a little bit more interesting because of what I know. But it's not mandatory that you interpret to every visitor, like I said. It's often that you can tell that even if you give them the out and they say, okay, 5 minutes in, the glaze, they're just staring at you, they're not listening, and that's okay. And just find an opportune way to kind of segue out of it and let them explore, because oftentimes people have to look around first before they can even formulate a question. A lot of people are visual people who can just look around and then they come back to you. But a part of offering the opportunity to all is something that I characterize as becoming their person. Like if you're the person at the front door who greeted them and said, hey, let me share a little bit with you, even if they said no, they're going to remember that it was you versus anybody else who's in the house that day, and they're going to come back to you and they're going to say, okay, I was upstairs and this doesn't make sense, or what have you. So offering that opportunity to everyone, don't feel like you need to stand on the soapbox for 10 minutes every time someone comes in the house to give your entire spiel, introduction, and no one can go anywhere. If they're not ready to talk about it yet, then they're not ready to talk about it yet. And hopefully you can create those opportunities for conversation later. As you kind of grow in this situation, I found a lot of really great opportunities, not even giving an introduction, but just kind of wandering up and seeing what people are looking at and saying, isn't that painting really interesting? And they'll say, yeah, but then you've opened the door for them to ask more questions. Just reminding them like, hey, I'm still here. I can help you if you want it. If you don't, then I'm just here smiling and hoping that you're having a good time. But most people are coming in because of just plain curiosity. So you kind of have an open forum. If they're willing and have the time, they might listen to you. If they don't, they might just walk around. But making sure that opportunity is just open, that you're just an open person saying, I'm here, I'm ready to help you if you need help. I'm ready to give you an idea of where you are and help you feel oriented. And then whatever comes of that is what comes of that organically. Interpretation is also thematic. Facts are important to an extent, but how much is the visitor learning if you're just spewing information? That's something we've been talking about. A theme helps to organize your thoughts and emphasize that point for your audience. So at the end of the day, we are storytellers. We are people who are telling a rounded narrative of some story. Now, at times that could be a basic introduction that's telling you who Henry Shaw is from a general sense. But there are times where someone's asking you a question about something that's in the bedroom, and you're using an artifact as an opportunity to tell that story. As you learn more about what's on display, those pieces that are visually in front of you, while they are attractive, and I like them because they're beautiful, they all have stories, all of them. Either in relationship to Henry Shaw or in relationship to the context of the Victorian period. So we continue to try to generate that content to help you learn more about those things. I write artifact profiles every other month where I take a piece that's on display and we just talk about how it's made, where it's from, how Henry Shaw might have used it, why it would have been important to the culture. So that way you're continually finding ways to start telling that story. It's not just, look at this stuff, it's really great. It's, isn't that table unusual? I've never seen one like it. Let me tell you why this is interesting. And kind of generating those narrative opportunities. Again, my goal is never to give a lecture. My goal, if I'm talking for a long time, is to tell a story. And make that a little bit more relevant to people. Speaking of relevant, finding those connections between your topic and your audience can be easy at times, but can also be a challenge. So, for example, this photo is of a registry book. Henry Shaw was a very particular and dedicated note taker in terms of his business. He wrote his ledgers multiple times by hand. He has very good handwriting, so he's easy to read. But kind of offering some of those historic surprises. people say, oh, we can all write, but can you imagine writing your records multiple times by hand? Most people in the 21st century cannot. Can barely remember a time when you wrote everything down. Or here's a shaving mug with a shaving tool. Look, if you see someone admiring that, saying, can you imagine a time where you were shaving with a straight blade, or someone else was doing it for you all the time? You weren't shaving yourself, someone else was doing it for you. It was a trust exercise. Finding ways, both of these things, shaving and writing, apply to humans today, but in a very different way. So finding where you're taking something old and you're talking about how it could apply to someone's life today helps people identify that, oh, we're not that different, but there are some really unusual things that I didn't know about that do make us different. And that's why I'm learning something new or finding something unusual that I would never have engaged with before. This is the most important slide, maybe of them all. This is my favorite analogy that you will hear me say time and time again. You are the Velcro that makes the information stick. Because again, we could just hand them some things to read, or they could just listen to a video, but you, the personal elements that you are offering to our visitors, you are what are creating the opportunity to bridge what they already know with something new that they're learning. You are this sticky part in the middle that's bringing those two things together, because you're helping understand what they need or what they're interested in, and then teaching something new by building upon that, by taking just one, even if it's just one little tiny thing, you're taking what's at the base level of their understanding and adding one layer to it. And every time they come back, hopefully, we can add another layer to what they understand, either about the place, Henry Shaw, other people, how we got here, St. Louis as a community, any of those things. But finding and using your strengths, as Dave mentioned, people know when you are passionate about something. They understand when you like something, and that's okay. There are many volunteers who come to me and say, I'm sorry, I'm upstairs all the time, but I just really like the beds, or that's okay, because that means that you're talking about something that you probably know more about because you're interested in it personally, but you're delivering it in a way that's passionate and genuinely interested in sharing that information with someone else. Not that I don't encourage you to learn more about new things all the time, but using your strengths, whatever that is, I would encourage you to do some experimentation once you get in the house and kind of figure out what those things are. I am fortunate, there is something about my face that makes people comfortable talking to me. Like, I'm the person on an airplane that people are like sitting next to, and then all of a sudden they're telling their life story kind of thing. So I try to use that to my advantage. There are often times where visitors are just in a room, so I just go in there and just stand there and just kind of smile. I look at whatever they're looking at. And oftentimes it just creates something that is a conversation organically. They're saying, either they say, how long have you worked here? Or what do you do here? Or they want to talk to you, even if it's not about the stuff. But if you open that door, pretty soon we're talking about the stuff that I want to share with them. Dave, what do you feel like your strength is? In
What
drawing,
my strength is?
Yeah, in drawing people in.
I like to talk.
Yeah.
And I like to talk about Tower Row House.
Yeah.
And I like to talk, and I know quite a bit about Henry Shaw. I like to talk about Henry Shaw and how it started, and the garden. I like to, but mainly, you'll find the people that you like to talk to, and they want to hear you listen, and they will listen to you. And I like to think that I can pick people that want to listen to me, or look at me and say, oh, would you shut up? You know, so again, I think my big thing is that I like to talk.
I would agree with you. I would agree that providing an introduction for you isn't a challenge. But for you to just stand up and say hello to someone and then start talking to them and give them an introduction. I have other volunteers who hate that introduction part, where they have to kind of stand by the door and say hello and just start where things can be kind of awkward, because sometimes people are looking at you like, what do you want from me? Who are
Right.
you? But then they're upstairs answering questions because people have started to walk around, and they're more willing, like we just talked about, Boyd, to be the people who are fielding any question from anywhere, and they're better at kind of talking on the fly and answering those questions from somewhere inside. So both of those things have extreme value, but figuring out kind of where your strengths are is, I think, how some people become more rewarded, because you don't have to feel obligated to, if you feel uncomfortable having to introduce the space from a general role, then there's other things that you can do that can still share that interpretive messaging. It's just in a different format. So kind of interacting with lots of different volunteers. I'm gonna go through at the end and kind of learn what days you think might be your best days for volunteering, and then I'll kind of pair you with someone that usually works on that day. But what interacting and kind of shadowing everybody who works on that day, you're gonna see a lot of different styles. You're gonna see a lot of people doing things a lot of different ways. And learning kind of what your comfortable style is to share information. I have one volunteer who, every time someone comes in, he asks where they're from. And that's great, because it catches people off guard, and people like to share where they're from. There's some pride there. And then he's talking about, oh, I've been to so-and-so. He's traveled a lot, so he'll say, oh, I've been to so-and-so, or I've been to so-and-so. And then all of a sudden he'll say, so, I know a little bit about this place. Do you want me to share that for the next couple minutes? And then usually they're like, okay, I'm already talking to you. Sure. You know, there's a style that you will eventually come to find that is most comfortable. So be open to however that manifests. Yes, Sharon, I'm sorry.
My question was, when you sign up for a shift in service, do we know where we're gonna be, or who makes the choice if you're at the front door or on the second floor?
So here's how things usually work. It depends on how many people have signed up that day. The most people that can sign up during a shift are 3 people. So, like I said, there are some people who love to be upstairs. And so they'll come in and they'll talk to the other people, other volunteers, and if there's 3 people there that day, they'll say, hey, I really want to go upstairs. And then in amongst the group, they'll say, okay, if you're the only other volunteer there, then it's between you and the staff person to identify, maybe we both need to be down here greeting people because the volume is high, or the staff person can take care of that and you can go upstairs. It just depends on the group versus during Glow where you're assigned a place. It's something that you do kind of as you come in for your shift. You kind of talk through it and say, hey, you know, I think I'm going to kind of go be back by the kitchen today because that is a cool place to be. And then if nobody objects or says anything else, then there you are. So it's more informal than a Glow shift would be.
Oh, is the house open during Garden Glow?
It sure is. It sure is.
Every night.
Every night.
Yeah.
So that'll be something.
It's
Oh.
very different. It's very different.
People are like in line in one place.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you don't have really time to talk, to say hi. You know, that's about it. I mean, because there's so many people. But people still do ask questions, though, I mean, you know. And, you know, but to give a spiel, you really can't. I mean, because there's so many people. But people still do like to ask questions, though, that, and that's where you come up with some really strange ones, too. So
Yeah, there's a lot more new visitors during Garden Glow, and as Mary mentioned, that then you are assigned you sign up for a specific room during Garden Glow. So that way you know exactly where you're going, because there's no time to have that conversation of I'm going to go here and I'm going to go here. There's no time for that. You just got to go to where you need to go and see 3,000 people at a time. So
Wow.
this is a very different situation for those who have worked Glow previously. It's a lot.
of difference.
You have a lot more opportunity for longer, more calm, casual engagement
And
versus
fun.
just answering a question and then they have to move on because they're in the line.
Because, the line's always moving, isn't it?
Yep.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then sometimes somebody asks a question and then it's back up, but it's a balance.
Yeah.
And it's crucial. I was just gonna say it's crucial. Like there's certain positions where we need, like we have to have someone at the back door.
Right.
We don't want people trapped in the house. We gotta have people, you know, there's certain areas where we know we need people, where that's not always the case
During the regular
during the
season.
regular
It's a lot more relaxed, it's
Yeah.
very different. Okay, we're gonna talk about getting people into the house. Yes,
It
Mary?
just occurred to me,
Yes.
so during other times, I've only volunteered there at Glow, so do people have to, like, exit the back the way
No.
they do at Glow? They can
No.
come and go as they like?
Yes,
Yes.
it's free form, there's no line. They can go anywhere they'd like to go, upstairs and downstairs. And so, and they go out the front door. The front door is the in and the out.
Okay.
So it's much calmer. We're gonna talk about how we get people into the house. I have to use the restroom, surprisingly, but I think Dave, actually, if you wanna come up here and chat about this, I know you haven't seen these slides,
Okay.
but he's gonna improv right now.
Because he likes to talk.
Because you like to talk.
Because I like to talk.
Yeah.
All right, so what am I?
All you gotta do is just talk about how people come into the garden.
Oh,
Coming, like how they get to Tower Grove House.
oh, okay.
So when someone comes into the garden, how do they get to Tower Grove House?
All right.
See, and so then the next slide's about the house, so I'll be right back.
Okay. The, many times the people that come in, even during the glow, they're members of the garden, and they'll say, well, I've never been into the house before. Somebody told me it's never open, or it's only open on certain days. Well, from April 1st to the end of December, we're open Wednesday through Sunday. So we are open 5 days a week. I mean, but most people don't. But when they come in, as I said, usually, they'll stop you, and you can see them when they're walking up around the circle. They're stopping and reading the sign that's in front and talking about the house. It says all about it, and then they're going to come up into the house when they do. When they come up the stairs, the first thing that we do, that is we meet them. You say, welcome. Have you been to Tower Grove House before? Have you been here before? And this is how we really started off. And most of them will say no, believe it or not, most of them will say no. And again, I like to ask them, well, are you from St. Louis? Are you from the area? No, I'm from Chicago or whatever. Well, so, all right, well, do you know any, well, let's walk through the house. And they'll say, well, is it a guided tour? And I said, no, it's not a guided tour. You just walk around on your own. But we're here, and we're going to tell you a little bit about the house. And then we're going to, if you have any questions, we're always here to answer your questions. But what I like to do, I like to take them into the parlor first, and I'll say, we're gonna make this formal. We're gonna start in the parlor, and just give a very brief history of what Haley's gone through about Henry Shaw. Not go into any great detail because people are there to see the house. They want to know about Shaw too. Big questions you get: where did he make his money? That's a big question. Where did Shaw get his money? Was this always his private estate? No, it wasn't always his private estate. Where did he get his money? I said he had a Walmart, and I always refer to it as a Walmart down there. Basically, is what it was. But then you just go through and you talk a little bit like talking about going through up to the point where he died. And again, not into great detail. If people will have questions, they'll ask you, and you answer them. But just basically what Haley has given, just to go over the basics, and then there's different articles in each one of the rooms that they will ask about. The piano is a big thing in the parlor. They'll say, well, is this the piano that Effie Garstad blackmailed Henry Shaw with? I said, no, it's not the piano, but he had several of them. And they'll ask about the piano. They'll ask about the fireplaces. Well, where did that pink marble come? Did that come from just right out of St. Louis? No, it's Italian marble. And the fireplaces were constructed on the East Coast and brought here and then installed here. But just different things. So pick out different things. And that's what's fun about doing this. When you go into each one of the rooms, you'll see the obvious things that people will talk about: the piano, the inlaid Italian marble that's in the parlor, the wick trimmers that are on the table, when you go into the dining room, the plate warmer. I refer to it as the early microwave. It's sitting in front of the fireplace. The biggest question about any furniture we get is the sideboard. The break front that's on the western wall in the dining room. It's solid mahogany. I was told it weighs around 500 pounds. Probably, if any piece of furniture we could sell in the whole house, it would be that one. You have more questions about that. It's a beautiful piece of furniture. They ask about the furnishings. Is this it says all belong to Henry Shaw. 85% of it, yes, did belong to Henry Shaw. But so when you go through each room and you'll see something in there, and even for yourself now, you look at it, there's a mirrored case that used to put music in. People will ask about that. Some of the most unusual things that people will ask about. But it's no big thing answering them, because I'm making it sound easy because this will be my 8th year, but it really is easy. It's an easy place to volunteer. Healy gives you so much information on it, and all you have to do. But I mean, there's so many things that you can talk about in there. The tables, the light fixture. Big thing I'm going to get. Healy hates for me to say this, but we get questions all the time. Is it haunted? We get that all the time.
We'll get there, we got a slide.
Oh, excuse me.
We'll get there.
I'll stop that.
No, you'll have the opportunity. We'll get there.
Haley, you turned them loose.
I know, that's what
Anyway, so
happened.
Haley's back, so I'm going to sit down.
No, you're here. You're here though, Dave, because what we're talking about here has to do with, the furnishings that we understand come from 2 inventories that are in our archive, one from 1854 and 1889. So we have, that is the most crucial thing that we had in recreating what our experience looks like, because there are no interior photos of Tower Grove House in the time that Mr. Shaw lived there. So we have no exact way of knowing how the rooms were set up or what was where. A lot of the furniture that is in the house was actually at his townhome, because he had 2 houses worth of furniture. And so here, I wanted to take a little room by room tour, because again, we can't be at the house today because it's sleeping. And so understanding kind of what you see room by room, I think, is a lot of what Dave has started to share with us here. So
When you said inventories from those 2 dates, were those inventories only of Tower Grove House, or is there
Both.
an inventory of the townhouse?
yes, so all of his belongings.
Both in
Yes.
those 2?
Yes, thank you for clarifying. So in the reception room, that's where you would offer that brief summary, which I think is what Dave kind of started on there. There is a video that you can offer to our guests if you would rather. Sometimes, especially younger kids, want to watch the video. We normally do it more interpersonal, as we've been talking through here, but there is a video backup with captions if someone is hard of hearing or would like to sit down and watch the video. And then this is the map. There's the map I was talking about. Blessings. Look, so here we are right here. This map is framed in the reception room. This is a great teaching tool to show people, look, nothing is there. This is Tower Grove Park right here.
Tower Grove House?
Tower Grove House is right there.
Oh, okay.
And this is the rest of the garden right
Just see
there.
the tower.
Yes.
And then this is Tower Grove Park. So showing them, look at all of this farmland. Those are fun opportunities. The front hallway and the entryway, when people walk in, most people are usually kind of dumbfounded, I would say.
Yes.
They're kind of unsure of where they are, and they're looking around. The ceilings are high. You got lots of wallpaper, and things are busy.
You look at the ceilings, how tall they are.
How tall are they?
12 and a half downstairs, 15 and a half upstairs.
Okay.
In
So-
the old,
Yes.
the original part of the
Yes.
house.
And so then they're also seeing the linoleum. We have a lot of great interpretive material about linoleum, because linoleum is a very cool, sustainable product. Linoleum, what is real linoleum, is made from plant-based materials, combination of jute fibers and all types of plant, even the resin that they use is all plant-based. Henry Shaw would have had it just a few years after it was invented, making his cleaning much easier. I'm sure his house help was very excited about the linoleum. But a lot of people don't know the difference between linoleum and vinyl. A lot of people say, oh, I had linoleum when I was a kid. No, that's vinyl. Linoleum is a very expensive plant-based product that vinyl was copied off of, making it cheaper and more readily available. That's my tangent. But we have a lot of great resources about the linoleum, how we picked the linoleum pattern. The linoleum pattern is an exact replica of what Henry Shaw would have chosen, because we have layers of flooring, we have pictures of those things. We also are able to show the difference in the door frames, so that way people can see the difference between the new side and the old side. So kind of pointing out some of those architectural features, so that way people feel oriented. as to where they are. Yes, Andrea?
I was just gonna say, if you're interested in hearing more about the linoleum, Haley wrote a really good artifact profile
Yeah.
on it
Yeah.
that we got a lot of, it was in one of the binds previously. It got a lot of good reads and a lot of people really felt good about having additional information. So let her or I know and we will send that to you. We
Right.
have
We also have a book in the house.
Yeah, great.
That, on, with the rest of the resources that's by the reception desk, there's a book where I put all of the past artifact profiles. So if you're in the house and it's slow, you might have the opportunity to read some of those things. So Dave was just talking about the front parlor. Dave, remind me again what you were sharing here that people are most
The
often
piano.
talking about? Yes.
The piano, it's English, rosewood. The people will ask about it, and what's different on this is they'll notice that it's smaller, 84 keys versus the standard keys. They'll ask who the manufacturer, who made it, Allison and Allison. But what's good about this, in each one of the rooms that you go in, there's a little plastic holder that has pictures of the piano. It has pictures of different things in the room, of more important type things, and it gives information on each one of those. So not only for yourself, but also the visitor can pick that up and read it too. It has the pictures on the wall up here, who these people are. There's 3 paintings in the house that Shaw had purchased. This is one of them. One of them's in the dining room, and one of them is the bedroom. Each one of these, though, in the room, there's a plastic, a laminated sheet that tells about this, and which is very interesting. I mean, so this is the table that Shaw purchased in Italy. It's an Italian inlaid marble. On it, I don't know if you could see the wick trimmer, but there's a silver wick trimmer, looks like a pair of scissors. And you'll get a lot of questions about that. And it's on the table, and it's to trim the wicks. You get a lot of questions about those. The carpeting, you'll get questioning about the carpeting. Is this the original carpeting? No, it's not the original carpeting, but it's the type that they would have had at that period. You'll get questions about the shutters, how unusual the shutters are on the inside and how they're folded up. And these are 6/6 windows, which is very unusual too, because taking into consideration there was no light in the rooms. I mean, kerosene lights back this time, so it brings in so much light into the room. Another thing, there's wheels on the chairs. A lot of people say, because there was no light, it was easier to take them to the window to read with the. There's a round table back here.
My favorite table. Yeah. I love that table.
That is, it's a folded table. It's round and it folds, all right? And so many people say, oh, that was a fireplace that protected the fire, from getting too hot in the room. Well, no, it's not, because as Haley told us.
Debunked myth.
Yeah, so what Haley told us all, it's paper mache. But it's a very ornate table, and people say, well, they put that in front of the fireplace so the heat wouldn't, get too much in the room. Well, if it was, the thing would burn up if it was, one thing. But I heard one person tell you, well, the reason they put those in front of there, because the ladies at the time, their makeup was partially made of beeswax. And they kept the beeswax from melting. Now, somebody said this. It takes about 145 degrees for beeswax to melt. Can't you imagine somebody getting that close to the fire and have her face running? I mean,
So what you're hearing here is that pretty much everything that you are seeing on display, while as a room look nice as a room, all of these items have some sort of story that you can share that isn't just, this is a table, this cute little table that we were talking about, again, is fabricated in an unusual way. It's hand painted on the front. It has a strange scene on the front of it. There are lots of different stories that belong to all of these pieces. And you'll hear me say time and time again that stuff is just stuff until you infuse the story within it. And so as time goes by, you will acquire these stories in your mind. So don't feel pressured to take it all in right now. But every single piece that we have, from the artwork to some of these little pieces and to the big furniture, all of these things have a function in the world that Henry Shaw lived in, and sharing some of those stories really helps people understand better that this isn't an accident. None of this is an accident. Everything in this house has a function, it has a purpose, and we're here to share how that impacted how they lived. The wheels on the chair is the perfect example of something where you're talking about what they're looking at and how it applied to function of the time in terms of moving things closer to windows so you could see with the light. The dining room here is set to look like Henry Shaw is doing some planning at the table for the garden. So a lot of times our volunteers are telling the narrative of how Henry Shaw would have laid all of his plans out to make some plans. What else in here is great, Dave?
The secretary, this is, it is extremely tall because of the 12.5-foot ceilings. So the furniture had to have been custom made, so it would have been tall. It's ash, it's solid ash. To me, it's a beautiful piece of furniture. You can't see, but here on this wall is the sideboard that I was talking about. The Henry Shaw would have had the sideboard. And I was also told, I don't know, Haley can confirm this, that part of the inside of the sideboard had like galvanized metal because it was used for wine. He kept a lot of his wine in there, you know, that, right here you can't see it, but this is the plate warmer. The marble, again, they're matching in the parlor and the dining room. It's pink marble. It's not, Carrara marble is white, so this is pink Italian marble. But I was told that it was chosen specifically for the house, and then the marble was taken to, it was constructed someplace on the East Coast, and then the fireplace was brought in and installed in the house.
Well, this plate warmer is great for kiddos.
Oh,
Yeah, the back of it is open to the fire, so the plates keep warm from the fire.
Were they for wood in the bottom, or how did that?
No, it's just an
It's by the
open
fireplace.
metal
It's
container
just a
that's right
metal
by the fire.
case.
Cast iron like.
But a lot of kids, you'll be surprised, put together that that's like a microwave. A lot of people can make those connections, but sometimes we have to kind of guide those connections, and some of those things are really cool.
there was,
for
last year
kids.
at the Glow, there was this young man that came in and he was telling his grandparents about this, and he was talking about, oh, this is a plate warmer, this is what they were using. He was about 10 or 11 years old. And I'm standing and I'm fascinated about this young man knows all of this stuff, you know. So he goes out and his mother was standing there and said, I have to compliment you. I said that your son knows all about that. And he says, you told him that last year. He remembered it, though, so he remembered it, you know. But
That's cute.
Haley said the kids really liked it.
And then we do have a small dining room, which is a very neat room. It's the only addition that was made to the house while Henry Shaw was still living. And it has a cute little breakfast nook look to it.
That's on the first floor at the back?
Yes, ma'am. And so it has much simpler furnishings in it. We have a good artifact profile about the Flow Blue China, which would have been very popular at that time.
What do you call it?
Flow Blue.
Flow?
Yes. And so there's this great stained glass window in there that a lot of folks like to talk about. It's got some cool meanings of the geometric design. And so that room's a lot simpler, but I think the function of the room has a great story to tell that most people end up sharing about why it was constructed. And
Yeah, that was the only construction during Shaw's time. It was 1885, around that. Shaw ate very few of his meals in the dining room. As Haley just showed the photograph there, shows there's papers all over it. And of course, this is where he planned the garden. So to me, the fact that, you know, you have to get all of these papers up, set the table, so he ate most of his meals in the basement. As you go down the stairs, the first room on the left. And he it really didn't have a concrete floor, it had more like a gravel floor. And it was not the best of situation or places. In fact, one of the reasons they built it in 1885 to enclose the porch to make that back bedroom was the fact that they had built the outhouses too close to the back of the house, and the drainage was disrupting his dining room in the basement. So he's eating a meal with his drainage from the outhouses in there. So, but on the other hand, he was 85 years old when they built this. So, I mean, you know, so this is pretty good. So for all these years before that, he made it up and down the stairs, you know, but it, and I think at one time he also use it sort of as a office to Haley.
I don't think that's unreasonable, but I don't have any exact written
Uh,
documentation.
But it's a neat little room, it really is. And that's the only leaded glass or stained glass in the house, isn't it, Jim?
Mhm. And so upstairs, you know, a lot of people ask about those ceilings, that same question you had, Sharon. A lot of people are asking about ceilings. But there's also a door right here to the east wing that shows that there's a difference between the original side and the newer side. We'd like to point out the trunk d'Aloy, which is right here on the wall. It's a beautiful wall piece that would have been hand painted onto the wall before the wallpaper was adhered. It would have been kind of the wall furnishing at that time. It's meant to look like you're looking outside. It's a three-dimensional image that would have been hand painted. It's a very cool thing, and so we put glass around it so you can see where the pattern was, and it's faded, but it has a great sign with it. There's also the balcony doors here and transoms, and there's photos from the tower on a panel right here that's going to show you in our visitors what the view from the tower looks like in different directions.
Do you think we'll ever be able to go into the tower?
No. Unfortunately, the tower has never been renovated in any way. The staircase is no wider than I am. No one wants to be there. It's a very, you have to be a little adventurous.
It's not dangerous, is it? I mean, it's not.
No, people go up and down it for a variety of maintenance reasons, but in bulk, no one would ever really be climbing up and down those stairs.
But did Henry to go
Yeah.
view his estate?
Oral legend says yes, that he would go up there and look over his work, and even there's even some, I've heard some people say that there used to be a bell in the tower, and then you ring the bell for work and things like that. So there was some function to it other than just a lookout, but certainly he would have enjoyed the view. Why not?
And they said that he had people that would knock on the door and want to go up in the balcony and the tower to look over, Italianate or Tuscan for the Italian farmers to look over their land. And so the people would come in and say, Henry, can I go up there and knock on the door? And they said it got to a point that they wouldn't even knock on the door. People would just come in, walk up, and look out at the garden. So it.
Sounds terrible.
It,
So there are 2 bedrooms upstairs. The guest bedroom shows portraits of both Caroline on one wall, and then these 3 scientific gentlemen here, Engelman, Gray, and Hooker. A lot of people will ask you about who's on the wall. These are people who would have influenced Mr. Shaw in his botanical endeavors. This rounder gentleman over here is Engelman. This is Asa Gray, the handsome gentleman in the center, and then Hooker from the Royal Botanical Garden.
Where's the picture of Caroline?
Caroline is directly to the left when you walk in, just adjacent to the bed. And many people will see her and say, who is that? Is that a girlfriend? Who is that? And it's a portrait of his sister. She looks very serious. But it's a great opportunity to talk more about her life. A lot of people like to know she's a cougar. They get a kick out of that. But also the importance of her role in helping to build the house and develop what they're seeing can't be understated. We always have tools and notes out that kind of indicate that a visiting scientist is there. In that the most likely person who would have stayed in these guest bedrooms are people who were visiting the garden that were scientists or friends of Henry Shaw.
Would it be Caroline too?
And Caroline, if
Because
yes.
to me, that room has more of a feminine.
It does,
touch.
yes. So that's
The
not
bed
unreasonable.
does,
And then there's also a closet in that room. So we do get a lot of questions about closets. Closets are a very special thing in the Victorian time period. So at that time, a lot of houses didn't have closets. You would have bought wardrobes and other things to put your furniture in, but closets were taxed as an independent room. So you would have paid more money to have a closet. So all of the rooms in the house that are bedrooms have closets in them. And so people tend to notice that as well. There's also a wonderful Wardian case that's in this room that I wrote an artifact profile about. That's a great way to share plant history with the kind of history that we're talking about. It's the early version of what many people identify as a terrarium, but would have been the first way that people would have been able to transport live plants across oceans or the country. and would have been the reason that we would have been able to cultivate many more live varieties of plants here at the garden that were from all over.
And it's really neat, it's over the corner, and it's very, very Victorian. I mean, was that original for the house, do you know, Haley, or?
Not that I'm aware of.
It is, it's really
But yes,
something
it's
to
of that
see.
time period.
Another thing, there's a chamber pot under the bed, and you have a lot of questions about the chamber pot, kids,
Especially
you
with the
know.
kiddos.
Yeah, what is that under there for? Is it, did they have lunch? Or, what? I mean, just things, kids don't know what a chamber pot is. I've heard people call it a new term they're using now, ensuite or something like that.
Oh,
Ensuite, and they put the chamber pot, somebody said, well, does that mean ensuite? I said, oh.
Well, technically, yes.
I guess it does, you know, then.
It's
if
in
you
the
have questions
bedroom.
about the chamber pot.
I noticed this past globe, I didn't see his. Usually, I mean, in the past, it was next to his bed, but I didn't see it this past globe.
So a lot of the items are moved because of how much the garden clubs decorate. And so they're in different places. I've also tried to find a balance to be more historically accurate with our chamber pots because
Because they were under the bed, not,
so if they were stored, like during the day, they would be stored like under the bed or in a cabinet. But if you were using them, you at night would put them in a corner because it would be completely dark, you don't have a light to turn on, and you need to be able to find like where it is. You don't want to kick something like that over. So I've been trying to put it in different places because Henry Shaw probably never really would have stored his because it's his house and he lived there all the time. You know, he wasn't going to work and storing it for some time. So, but the garden clubs have so much stuff sometimes that I have to put things away, so that way their things can be seen better. So,
Haley,
yes.
I don't know if I missed this, but what's your answer to questions regarding why are the bedrooms higher 15 feet as opposed to the 12 feet downstairs?
Mhm.
Somebody told me that was because of the heat.
Yes, the
Okay.
primary function is a cooling system.
Okay.
So,
That was right.
because heat rises, that does help. However, the height of ceilings also has to do with a social status symbol. So, of course, you can't build 12-foot ceilings if you're a penniless common worker. So if you have the money, big ceilings also indicate wealth and grandeur, and it does intentionally create some of that awe that wealthy people want when you walk into their home. So it does absolutely have a function, but it is showing your wealth because you're able to self-cool your house because you have nice high ceilings. And so that has kind of a dual.
Okay, good.
And the 15 and a half is more unusual than the 12 and a half downstairs. I mean, you know, 15 and a half, obviously there's other houses in St. Louis that have 15 and a half foot ceilings, but that's more unusual than the 12 and a half downstairs. 12 and a half, I think, is more common than opposed to 3 feet more.
Yes.
And, you know, and that's a good point. What I like to point out on that, the fact is the house is symmetric when you look at it. But if you look on the left side, there's actually 3 floors there. But if you look on the right side, there's only 2 floors. So this makes it, the fact that the height of the ceilings, these 2 rooms versus 3 floors on this side. The 3rd floor is, well, those 8-foot ceilings up there, aren't they? I think they're 8
They're an
foot
average
ceilings.
room size, yeah.
Average, but yet you have 2 floors, you have 2 floors here, but this side's 3 floors here, but the house is still symmetric. And you have to take it into considering the size of the rooms.
Both the original would have had 3 floors as well.
Oh, it would.
Yes. Yeah, it would have been divided. We have some good pictures in the reception room that often help people orient the difference between what is new and what is old. Where you can put them side by side in a photo and say, look at these features versus these features, and that kind of helps them see that. The original home would have even been smaller. It would not have been symmetrical. As kind of a commentary to, I live on this side, my home lives on this side, and make a pretty clear visual delineation between who lives in what section. But then when they rebuilt it and they made it symmetrical. They still chose just average size ceilings for the addition as well. To have 3 floors instead of making grand high ceilings on both sides.
That was for Dr.
Trelease, yes,
Trelease.
yes. Great, good questions. And so then Henry Shaw's bedroom's also up there. There's a lot of great furniture from the townhouse in there, books. He has a medicine chest because we're trying to gently remind people that this is where he would have spent his last days. And so he has like a traveling medicine chest with bottles and things in it that kind of indicate that illness. Yes, Mary?
I'm sorry to keep.
No, you're fine.
People ask me, is that the bed he died in?
No.
Okay.
So the bed that's in the room currently is from the townhouse. It would have been one of his beds in that space, but the bed that would have been originally in Tiger Grove House would have been just a simple brass bed. This would have been a country home. So for as grand as it is, it would not have been as grand as we make it now because we've put 2 houses of furniture into one. And so no, that's a good question. But there's also a portrait of the Venetian lady. Dave, I'm sure you can attest, we get a lot of questions about this wonderful
Yes,
lady.
they want to know if that's his girlfriend. That's the big thing, is that Henry's girlfriend? And says, no, it's just a painting that he liked when he was on one of his trips to Europe, and, you know, he liked it, so he bought it. But, no, that's, the biggest was Eddie's girlfriend, you know, that,
No, but that's a great opportunity to talk about how art works. And that time it was very common for someone to travel and go to museums overseas and then find someone to make a copy. And then have a copy of it in your house if you had the wealth to do so. So that's kind of the functioning of having art in your house. Some of them are very famous paintings that somebody made a copy of. She is lovely, generally speaking, but you can tell that she's a copy in a variety of ways. She only has one hand visible. Hands cost more money because they take more detail. She's kind of puffy in the hand. You know, the hand detail is not ideal.
I have something to share with you.
Yeah.
It's interesting from what you just said. In visiting Shakespeare's
Mhm.
home in England,
Mhm.
they talk about it costing an arm and a leg.
Mhm.
Because if a portrait included arms and legs,
Mhm.
they cost
Oh,
more money.
that's where they come
So
from.
that's where that expression came from. And then you were
So it
talking
was
about,
literal.
yeah, and you were talking about the height of the room
Yeah.
in Shakespeare's time, which is interesting. The wealth was if you had a mattress and in your front window. So when people walked the street and they looked into the bedrooms, they knew they were wealthy people because they had a mattress.
Yes, that is so funny. I'm glad that you shared that because some of those are the types of things that people say, oh,
Right.
that's really
Yeah,
interesting.
no idea.
And
that
then it
arm
has a
and leg,
function.
that's a good thing
That's
to
a
bring
good
up.
one. That's a good one.
That's a good thing to bring
With
up.
that picture, since she only has
Especially,
one
she only has one
Yeah.
hand, well, the other hand is
Yeah.
like hidden and the
Cost
hand
more
that,
money.
the hand that she does have is not what you wanted. She's a very lovely woman and then her hand is like elephantitis, kind of like 3 sizes too big for her body.
An arm and a
So
leg.
they tried, but most of
That's
the
funny.
art in the house is unsigned because of that, because they're copies of portraits that are famous, and so if people ask who is the artist, most of them are unsigned, and then you explain the culture of that.
So all he
So
brought back from Europe was Victory? She was an original?
she was commissioned.
Oh, okay.
So all of the same artist that did his tomb that we saw in that marble, Ferdinand von Miller, you'll become familiar with because I believe
Oh, yeah.
he also did Victory.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. And then there are some
Oh,
other.
no, he didn't do Victory. No. The original was Cressini. It was Italian. Nicolai.
There you go. Thank you.
Nicolai did the Victory.
But there are many other sculptures
Tower
in
Grove
Tower
Park.
Grove Park by
Yes.
the same artist
Yes.
that did Victory.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's an original or it's a copy?
Is it a copy?
Which one?
I thought it was. I
Victory
thought it was.
signs over here.
Is it, I think that.
Well, it's a copy. No, it's a Cressini did the original is in the Pitti Palace in Florence. Nicolai or Nicolette, he copied it. Shaw saw it, and he liked it, and so it doesn't look exactly like the original, but the original it's an original copy, is what it is.
Yeah, I don't know if you would necessarily call it an original because it has different features.
Yeah, Cressini did the original.
He did it after the one that's in the city.
Yeah, yes, with.
Oh, yes. Shaw saw it, but I presume, I guess when he was on his.
Maybe
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
Those are good questions, thank you, Mary. So the basement, as I mentioned, has these panels with an audio tour on them about the people who would have lived in this area, or excuse me, who would have worked for Mr. Shaw. There's also tools and equipment in another room that talks about the working environment that would have been around this area. So we send a lot of folks down into the basement to engage with some of those more traditional museum displays. They're in the process of being redone. So I'm currently working on redoing them because they're about 10 years old. So we're in the
I've
process.
always been confused. When I originally toured the house, I thought I heard that the kitchen was in the basement. Was that true?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Most likely. So there's a room. There's two rooms here. One of which Henry probably would have taken his meals in because he was the coolest place in the house and he was single. No one was having dinner with him often there. And then there is an area for what looks like a wood burning or a cook stove of some sort. However, at that time it was much more common that your kitchen was outside of the building to reduce
Right,
fire
that's the other
hazard.
thing I heard, that the kitchen had to be outside the
Right.
building so the building didn't get full of smoke
Right.
or catch fire.
So that's most likely.
So why is there a kitchen then on the first place? Isn't that-
So
That's
yes,
a later-
so that's the addition. So
This
that
is when the director lived there?
Yes.
I got you.
yes.
So we don't know for sure, or?
I don't have any exact records. Again, I don't have the blueprint of the house that would have indicated what room was intended for what. But there are insets for fireplaces. So presumably they could
Probably the
have,
slaves cooked down there or in the outside kitchen?
the slaves probably would not have interacted inside the home in any dramatic way. He would have had house help that would have been immigrant labor
Oh.
as well. And so we don't have exact knowledge of who exactly was doing the cooking.
Oh.
If they're cooking in bulk, like breads or daily cooking, it probably would have been done outside, and then if there's a fire inside, they could have kept it warm. Or you know, if you made soup, you could
Or
take it
daily.
inside and then keep it going. If you were cooking in bulk for other people, you probably would have done it in the outdoor kitchen, but just had a place
But we
where,
don't have any records
No.
of that?
not exactly, no. Good question.
Thank you.
No, good questions. We've been talking about this combination of original and new wing. It's important to kind of make this delineation for our visitors because it's visually apparent that there is an original wing and a new wing. And so knowing that that is important to share with them, kind of giving them those differences. Where the exhibit is now, adjacent to the reception room on the east wing, we can talk about Dr. Trilli's because his photo is hanging on the wall and what he would have done. Talk about the difference between not having any indoor plumbing and no lighting and in disrepair and needing to have space for children. Kind of helps people understand why the east wing was rebuilt.
Okay, so only the east wing was in disrepair, but Mr. Shaw's part was, I would have thought he would have kept his place up pretty well.
Yeah, but just like any house that you live in for a long time, that things get older, and so the bathroom and those kinds of running water, those things would have eventually been installed into the entire house. The bathroom would have served, being that it was on the east wing, you know. So we're under the impression that the Trilli's family would have used the entire house still, but likely their children were likely not playing in the parlor necessarily. So though they were still in the newer part of the house because it was closer to bathrooms, running water, all of those amenities. You'll see now, because there's not a bathroom on the west side of the house, it still has a lot of the old functioning. So I'm sure they did repair if something was going to fall down, but I would not say that it was dramatically changed or upkept.
It was 40 years old when Shaw died, so
Right.
just the period, the fact that it's 40 years old, you know, it's going to have, as
And
Haley said,
they
some.
might have had budget constraints.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm so glad they left Mr. Shaw's space relatively unchanged, because we could show what it was like in the Victorian era.
Right, right.
And then it's also glad that they renovated the updated part, so we can go in there now and show them those things.
And what we'd like to point out is the fact that the doorway, as you come into the left, that doorway didn't exist when Shaw had the house. That was just a blank wall there, because the only, again, as Haley mentioned earlier, the only entrance would be through Rebecca Edom's upstairs and then down. But that doorway, as you come into the left, didn't exist. So and that's a good thing to point out to people too, that
Yeah, so the other thing I wanted to share is that we currently have a renovation project taking place, and that we're renovating the second floor bedrooms. That's in process, which means that throughout the course of the next year, there'll be different phases of construction and content creation.
How many bedrooms did they have?
There are 4 bedrooms on the second floor, one of which is an office now, so we're renovating 3 bedrooms. So the 2 that are in the main hallway, and then there's one past the bathroom across from where the office is. And so this space is going to share the life of Tara Grophouse after Henry Shaw's death, including Dr. Trelease and his life, technological and architectural advances, so running water, big deal. Bathroom, big deal. Also, people want to know how the house was rebuilt, and we have a lot of great photos of how the house was torn down and rebuilt in that construction in the 1890s. We also want to talk more about the expansion of the plant collection, because without Dr. Trelease and his work, we would not have the strong botanical footing in research that we do now. Henry Shaw certainly was a wonderful, charitable, well-meaning gentleman, but was not a trained scientist. So every director since then has been, and has dramatically changed how our plant collections work.
And did Mr. Shaw choose Dr. Trelease before his death?
Yes, yes, so he was familiar with him and chose him specifically. But also sharing about the life of St. Louis in the turn of the 1900s. St. Louis was a very interesting place at that time, and there are a lot of other things going on in the community that the Botanical Garden was directly in the center of, that we want to share and put into perspective in a broader sense.
Oh, we were gearing up for the World's Fair and the Olympics. It was
a big, we were a big deal.
Yeah.
So talking more about those through interactive and display areas, and having engagement there. So you'll see that space in a variety of.
When will it open?
So we will start, we are in the process of doing construction. The space will be available for visitors to walk through probably at the end of April, but it won't be completed. So we want to show the transition of a historic space and how you renovate historic homes. So we're taking that as an opportunity for a teaching moment. We get a lot of people who come to the house who say, I live in the Shaw neighborhood and I want to know more about how you wallpaper this. So we'll be going through the process as we show the visitors. So it will not be open when we first open in March, because we'll be still working on some of those things, but then throughout the year we'll be creating the content, putting up wallpaper, those kinds of things to show people what kind of a project that is for people who are historic home files.
Oh, they'll love it.
Yeah, it's definitely a different approach. Oftentimes you just want to make things perfect and then open it and show everything, but it's quite a project, and we want our visitors to know how that works for us, because it doesn't just happen magically. We don't just snap our fingers and everything looks perfect. So
one thing you'll get a lot of questions on the bathroom upstairs. Why does it have a Dutch door on it? And
I can't find anything but practical reasons.
You'll get a lot of questions. Why is that 2 doors? Haley, you know, so
Maybe so you could
yeah.
look and speak to your child in the.
Well, it kind of traps them in there. So like if you're thinking, I'm thinking like, okay, I'm a mom, and eventually the Trelease family had 3 children living at one time, but 5 children total. So you got a bunch of kids and you're trying to wash them, but you're also trying to like deal with your other kids. you can kind of keep some in there and you can be doing other things and watching them or vice versa.
That's a good point, too, I'm
So I
sorry.
think there's some function
Yeah.
to that.
Same as the Dutch door in the kitchen would have been.
Right, so you can still see in, but kind of keep people trapped. I hate to say it that way. Okay, so we're very close to time right now. We have about 10 minutes. And the next section can be something that we can talk about for hours. So I want to be in full disclosure in saying that if you have someplace to be at 1 o'clock, I understand that you're welcome to carry on. And a lot of this I will send out the PowerPoint with some of my notes in it. And you have a lot of this information in some of these pieces and you'll learn it over time. So it's completely up to you. If you're willing to stay, I'm going to try to keep it down to about 15 or 20 minutes if I do carry on speaking. But it's completely up to you if you have places to go and things to do based on time. Okay, I'm going to go quickly. So the point of doing some of these things in terms of the most frequently asked questions is that it helps us kind of identify that you're going to get asked some of the same questions all the time. And some of these questions are really basic questions, but you have the opportunity to give either a simple answer or tell a story. So some of the questions, like we often get asked how Henry Shaw made his money. You could simply say he was in the hardware business, which many people do. Or you could tell the story of how he came to New Orleans, what we spoke about before, the steamboat, the connections in Europe, those kinds of things that help provide a richer opportunity to tell a story. People want to know why the townhouse is at the garden and how that came to be. We have a great view of the administration building from the new kitchen in the east wing. And so being able to share, not just that it was moved brick by brick the year after Henry Shaw died, but this is a great indication of how great of an innovator Henry Shaw was, because he put in his will that he wanted it moved so that way it was never demolished in the course of daily life in St. Louis over time. And telling some of those more personal stories about him being particular, maybe a little bit controlling, but how it really saved a building that used to sit at 7th and Locust that would have been destroyed pretty quickly after his death when they renovated downtown at the turn of the century. As I mentioned before, we get this question all the time. Was Henry Shaw married? Just saying no is not usually an acceptable answer for our visitors, because visitors want to know. Visitors, they want the dirt. And so using it more as an opportunity to share some of his personality traits, like being a private person, like being a more reserved type is important here, because it narrates that even from beyond the grave, he's been nice and personal and kept it to himself. On the other hand, many people will ask you if Henry Shaw is gay.
All the time. They
Yeah.
ask that all
Yeah.
the time, and it's,
You'll get that a lot.
Well, yeah, I wonder myself.
And that's a reasonable thing to question,
yeah.
because being unmarried at that time was very uncommon. However, I think I find more success in answering that question, not just by brushing it off, but by saying, I don't have any record to confirm or deny that. I can't say. I can provide some context about the time in which he lived, and that those types of relationships, either with men or with women, were relatively acceptable in that he was wealthy and therefore he could do pretty much whatever he wanted. Even if you were married at that time, you could find relationships anywhere else.
Well, it's interesting he didn't
You
use
wanted
that
to.
defense in his suit against the woman.
And he did not, exactly. So even if that was the case, still trying to perpetuate that private life. If that is true, if that was the case, he still figured out a way to keep that private. And I think that kind of speaks more to to who he was as a person versus some assuming or making guesses about if it's true or not. I would rather talk about his personality traits that made us even today able to sit here and say, I don't know, I wonder, you know? We don't have any record. He would go on trips to Europe and casually mention, like, I went to dinner with this woman or I went to dinner with that woman. Never a girlfriend to be heard of, never anything concrete. And that, at a time when even St. Louis had a thriving upper class culture. I mean, he was engaged with people like the Bush family, the Lemps, all the famous names that you know, the Chateaus, everybody that you know from St. Louis history. He knew all of those people and ran in that circle and managed to keep his name clean. I mean, that kind of speaks to, like, that takes effort. That's a 100% intentional choice, so.
Also, none of his close employees or long-term employees ever divulged anything about his private life either.
We had many people who worked here after Mr. Shaw passed who refused to speak. You know, newspapers would come and want to do a story about, was he with this girl or that girl?
Maybe he didn't have anything to hide, maybe he was asexual.
Maybe, exactly.
Maybe he just didn't find his true love. He was a workaholic.
Or he wasn't
He was
looking.
devoted to
You know, some
his
people-
legacy.
Aren't interested.
Well, I think it's also important to contextualize the time in which he lived. The time of which he would have been married, you know, your 20s, 30s. He lived in a town that was a couple city blocks. His marriage options
Limited.
were very limited in the New World. He could have found someone in Europe that his family sent him up, which they tried to do. But he was really busy working for a long time, and then he got really busy building this garden. You know, I think once you start to kind of contextualize more about his life, people are a little bit more willing to say, oh, he was kind of busy. And if he was a wealthy gentleman and could just kind of do whatever he wanted on the down low with whomever he wanted, why would you get married? What would be the function of getting
Right, he
married?
didn't want children.
Yeah, you know, so people want to know, they're going to ask you straightforward, and we try to not step away from that question, but providing that context really offers
This
them.
makes me think of that controlling aspect where you got the idea that he always wanted everything he built to be maintained.
Mhm.
That's why he brought the townhouse there. Nobody could have split up his property.
Right.
So maybe he didn't want heirs, you know?
There's a lot that goes into it, but giving those personality traits, I think, helps visitors accept that he's not just like a mythical character. He's a real person that has a personality and made choices based on information.
You know, what I like to tell people when they ask me, I just say, we really don't know. And I think, me personally, I don't care. But regardless of what, look what he left us.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the only thing I just say, and most people just drop it.
Unfortunately, he was so unique.
Yeah.
We benefit.
Here's this beautiful haunted question that Dave was talking about
Haley's
before.
favorite.
A lot of people want to know if the garden is haunted. And they give me a hard time about it, not because I am some like, it's a non-believer, what is that what you call it, Dave?
Non-believer.
It's more that this conversation, while fun, interesting, kind of cool around Halloween, can be very distracting for a lot of our visitors, in that not everybody thinks it's cool and fun. I've had people who've come to the house who've said, I heard this was haunted, I will not come in here. And that to me is a distraction from an opportunity for learning, especially with kids. I cringe every time. I've heard one or two unnamed docents who kind of like elbowed that with kids to kind of give them the spooks. And that's really disappointing because a lot of kids in this generation, because of what they see in movies and other things, just assume all old things are haunted. And that's just not the case. You know, if people who are well-meaning and serious ask me this question, I often reply by saying, you know, it's an old space. Most old buildings have a life of their own. So there are things that creak and make noise Sometimes things happen that are a little bit questionable, but nothing scary. You're never gonna see the shape of Henry Shaw floating through the hallway. And try to, and at least try to kind of redirect that to, that's a good question. It would make sense that he was here because Henry Shaw loved this place so much because of X, Y, and Z. Or we also have ghost tours that happen around the Halloween season that are registered classes. So if people are really interested in that, we encourage them to sign up to come on the ghost tour, and then they'll get, it's a great historic tour that just kind of slides in some of the more spooky stories from some of the different areas of the garden. So we try not to overly indulge that, only because while I'm not worried about the person that I'm talking to, I'm worried about the people who are around me, who are gonna go home, and I gave them all this really great information, and now they're gonna go home and be like, guess what I heard? This haunted, that's not the #1 priority for what we share. And so we try to find ways to answer the question, but also not overly encourage it. We're not the Lent Mansion, we're not making money off of that narrative. We have a lot of other really great stories to tell that are above and beyond the other world.
Like facts.
Yeah, and that's what's hard. That's what's hard about this, is that I don't discredit, if somebody comes, Dave will attest to you, that people come with the stories or experiences that they want to share, which is perfectly fine. I can't confirm or deny that that's their life experience, and they're welcome to share it, but I can't say for certain
Well, that's it.
one way or the other.
There's a listing of many, but again, as Haley just said, to this person, whoever saw this or whatever they did, to them it was true, but as Haley said, we're a historic house, we're not a haunted house, and you'll get people ask you, and when I tell people, who knows, I said, if you're walking around upstairs and you see this little man with a cape and a hat, tell him Dave downstairs wants to talk to him. But I mean, as I said, you could really brush it up because, again, I am a very big believer in the paranormal. Not particularly Tower Grove House, but as Haley said, we are a historic house, and we're not a Lemp mansion. That everything, that's the only thing they talk about, not the Lemp family or the Lemp brewery. They talk about it being haunted, and that's not good because that's not what we are.
Yeah, I mean, and so it's okay to acknowledge them, but redirecting that towards the time of year when we do kind of more openly talk about it also helps. If you tell them, oh, we have a ghost tour if you want to come back around Halloween, then that kind of helps answer that. Yeah. It's not something to be afraid of. It's not, it's just being more aware that the people around you may or may not be comfortable with that conversation. Slavery.
Oh, yes.
I swear to you, we're very close to the end. Very close. So this is probably the most controversial question that you're going to get. I'm going to send you the factual information that we have, which is very small in terms of the enslaved people that lived at Tower Grove House. Besides a few quotations of how Henry Shaw felt about the institution of slavery prior to his engagement with it, which were negative. Coming from England, he said, I don't know how this works, I'm not really sure about this. Eventually, he did become a part of the institution of slavery. By 1853, he owned 11 persons. And because of that, we find ourselves having to become a little bit more expert about the context of which he was living, the times of St. Louis's racial segregation, and understanding more about how somebody like Henry Shaw, who has no background in this practice, would have become involved in this. He's very much a product of the times that he lived in, which again is by no means an excuse. We try to find opportunities to share what we know factually in terms of the persons who did live with, who were owned and lived in his vicinity and worked for Mr. Shaw. But unfortunately, we don't have much characterization about how that situation arose, why, or what his reasonings were, or what those persons did for Mr. Shaw. So the only way we keep track of numbers is through tax records, because they were listed as property, so we can see a variation of persons that were owned. And then we also have records of when his slaves ran away on the Underground Railroad and tried to leave this place. That indicates to a lot of our visitors that, oh, he must have been a terrible person and he must have been awful to them. And while I would encourage you to approach these conversations with caution, it's always important to remember that we are not here to make judgments or make excuses, regardless of if he was a terrible person or if he was the nicest person. These individuals were still owned by him, and that's not an acceptable situation in any era to have participated in, and we are doing our best to be transparent about how we inform people about that part of our history as a space.
Hey,
Yes.
do you know why he freed Juliet? Bought her in 1836, freed her in 1839?
We don't. We have very,
You
very,
don't know her age or anything?
all of those things come from tax records, in that we know that at one time he owned a person and then they don't show up anymore. In 1856, 1853, that's when the bulk tax shows 11 persons. They most likely would have been laborers or farm hands, maids or cooks. But it was very common at that time to own skilled people, in the people who were seamstresses, launderers, and then hire them out. So you were making money off of their skills. And so you're going to hear a lot of reactions to this. You're going to hear very typical, oh, well, he was just a product of his time, it was economic kind of thing. And you're going to hear a lot of people say, I can't believe that, I'm so angry about that. All of those things are okay. This is the only situation or topic where I would encourage you to provide the factual information and then let people have whatever space they need to have. If they're,
These are really the only facts we have, right?
I have some more narrative that I'll send you, but for the most part, those that are bullet pointed are the facts. But I think entering those conversations can be a little bit more touchy, and take a little bit more practice. Again, this is where context becomes really important. They'll say, well, why did he stop having slaves in 1856? Well, that's when immigrant labor became really cheap. All of a sudden, there was an influx of immigrants, and labor was really cheap. It was surely cheaper to hire an immigrant than it was to own a slave. Also, you were getting really close to the Civil War. Missouri, St. Louis in particular, completely divided. There was a lot of things happening at that time. His family wrote, we do have writings from his mother, refused to come to St. Louis and stay at his home because he owned slaves. I mean, this was a very personal issue for him too. And so providing people with some of that factual information and then letting them make decisions based on the context and the facts that you provide is the best that we can do. And sometimes that means people leave kind of bummed out or kind of mad or just want to brush it off. And I think I gave you this article here. This article is about approaching difficult topics and some of the strategies that you can use. Always making sure that you're not being confrontational or putting your own opinions or judgments into those, but also being ready to back out. If somebody's upset and needs to have that space, then that's okay too. But trying to find a way to make their experience as positive as possible. It's hard in that context. So we will continue to, I try to provide as many resources as possible to have those conversations. If you don't feel ready to have those conversations, then that's okay too. And if somebody asks those questions, either redirect them to the staff person or find someone who is volunteering that day who is comfortable talking about that. But know that our job is not to make excuses. It's to provide our role in that institution and allow people to process that information based on what we're sharing with them. Okay? lastly, I had to add something about the museum building because it's about to open.
Yay!
Yay! So everything is slated to open at the end of April. We have a wonderful new addition. I have to mention this because this is where the bathroom is. It's going to be so wonderful. We used to have like one bathroom there for a very long time, and now we have a fully functional, accessible, multi-stall, family restroom, the whole 9 yards. All to other visitor amenities like vending machines, water fountains, places to sit down. It's going to be amazing. But the Victoria District is going to get kind of busy. So this year is actually a really exciting time for you to join us because there's going to be a lot more people who are coming because the museum building hasn't been open in, gosh, what, 40, 50 years to the public? And so this is a new thing on Garden Grounds, and it's going to be kind of the hot spot for a while.
Well,
So
I mean, when I was a kid, there were
Mhm.
programs in there, but
Yes.
it wasn't the museum building.
Right. Right. So I mean, this is the first
Made me
opportunity.
feel really old just now.
No, but this is the first time in a very long time that visitors can visit, see displays, see the beautiful mural on the inside.
When do you see it?
Oh my
It's
God.
absolutely beautiful on the inside.
So clear your
It's
calendars,
unbelievable.
folks. Because this is the time to
It's going to be
there.
very cool.
Yeah.
The mural is completely redone, and it is beautiful. Here's that cool picture we were talking about of Henry lying in state in the museum building. So some of the stuff you will recognize, but all of these like plants in here must be for his funeral, which I think is really interesting. Just a bunch of palms, just like a tropical burial. But knowing that, again, like I said, there's always things changing inside Tower Grove House too. So a lot of those meetings that you asked about earlier help you learn what kind of daily programs we're doing. We do story time pretty much every day or upon request. And we have seek and find sheets that have coloring sheet on the back, but then encourage people to go back out into the garden. Those change all the time. And then we have lots of other programs. Sometimes they're outside the house, sometimes they're inside, talking about a variety of topics. We also help with adult classes, like we talked about. The ghost tours aren't the only ones that Tower Grove House is open for, that we do some history. Besides all of you wonderful volunteer interpreters, we also write these artifact profiles so that we can learn more about the artifacts that are on display. And so we're constantly learning and we're constantly changing. Can you believe it? I made it.